Hey everybody, this is Peyton from 4x4 USA, and this is another episode of the 4x4 Chronicles. In the last episode, we talked about getting your rig ready to rock and roll. But now you've been driving. You've been out wheeling with your friends, maybe doing some snow crawling, whatever it is. But you're looking for the next upgrade. I'm gonna reiterate this. It's not tires. Tires are probably the next video, to be honest with you. This episode is called Lift or Not to Lift. And I have three main questions that probably go hand in hand. The first question I like to ask is, why do I want a lift and what is the purpose? Do I want bigger tires? What size? Do I want better ground clearance? What kind of flexibility am I looking for? And how much travel do I need? The second question then is, what is my overall goal for my 4x4? Do I want to just drive it on trails, 2 tracks, dirt roads? Do I want to go overlanding, pack a bunch of weight in it, and live out of it for a couple weeks and go places that most other 4x4s can't? Or do I want to rock crawl? Or do I just want to be a pavement princess? And then the last question I like to look at is, what is my budget? Am I on the hockey puck body lift budget, or the king coil budget, or somewhere in between? I think after asking those three main questions, you should be able to decipher what kind of suspension you want to put in your 4x4. So, what we're gonna go over here is lift styles. We're gonna start with the cheapest and work to our most expensive. So, where to begin? Body lifts. Absolutely despise body lifts, but they are probably the cheapest lift that you can get on the market. They can cost anywhere from about $50 to $300, give or take, depending on what brand that you're going for. Personally, if I'm gonna do a body lift, I'm just gonna go buy some hockey pucks at your local sporting goods store, drill some holes in it, and put those on top of my body mounts that I already have. And that's the very first one, the hockey puck. It's about $3 a hockey puck. You can't get any cheaper than that. It'll raise your body up about 2 inches. Maybe you can slide in a bigger set of tires. All right, and then the pros for this. Very inexpensive, like we talked about. Easier to install. And the tools are just basic tools, just ratchet and some wrenches, maybe an impact gun if you have one. Pretty easy. And then obviously a jack and a torque wrench, like we talked about earlier. This lift, we also kind of hit on already. You can add a little bit bigger tire on to your vehicle. That's very inexpensive, basically. Cons, you don't get any more ground clearance because all you're lifting is your body from your frame. Another one is it does not look great. I think that the gaps are weird and steering components get weird, and then your bumper's like 2 inches lower, and then you have to rig something to have your bumper raise up, and it's just, I just don't like how they look. I think the next point that I want to make is it could potentially change your handling. All suspension is going to change your handling, but there's this thing called the center of gravity, and when you only raise your body, the very tippy point is going to be higher. You'll have a higher chance of rolling your vehicle. So the next the next lifts that we are going to talk about are now really getting into suspension. This is going to have to be a 2-part podcast because we'll really get into the nitty-gritty of suspension lifts probably in the next one, just because this is a very long topic and it's very important. So suspension lifts usually are more expensive. You can get a suspension lift from about $500 to as much as you want to spend. That's what I would say about that. This lifts your frame off the ground, giving you more ground clearance, what most people are looking for. The higher you can get your body away from the danger, like rocks or deeper holes or whatever it may be, that's what we're looking for. Get our body away from the danger. Now, pros for suspension lift: more ground clearance. I can't hammer that enough. More ground clearance. The next one, improves approach and departure. With more ground clearance, you'll be able to come up to quote unquote steeper grade hills and exit steeper grade hills without scraping your front and rear bumper. Now, if it's too steep, you're not going to be able to avoid the scrape. And that's fine. It's inevitable in some places. But if you could get your vehicle up maybe 2 or 3 more inches, you could maybe get your tires to the bank before your bumper scrapes. The next thing, bigger tires. Everybody wants bigger tires, especially when you're out wheeling. You want a bigger tire to go over objects easier. Plus, bigger tires bring you, go back to it, more ground clearance. If you can get more ground clearance, your body's away from danger. Also, the advantage of the bigger tires in this situation, you can drive in more diverse conditions. So you'll do better in snow, you'll do better in mud, you'll do better in sand. We'll get into tires in another video, but the bigger your tire, bueno. There are still cons to bigger tires, and like I said, we'll get into that. The next thing that we're going to be looking at that is a pro is suspension articulation. This means, let's break that down. This means that your suspension will have a better movement, droop, or compression. I think this is on the pros list because you'll be able to drive over larger or more dynamic objects. So you take your stock Jeep Cherokee and you go out wheeling and there's a big boulder in front of you. You try and drive over it and it just doesn't work out because your front suspension, you can't get your tire on the ground because it's all hung up and you don't got enough articulation in your suspension. It's just a mess. So you're gonna have better suspension articulation to go over more diverse objects, keeping your tires more-ish on the ground, which then allows you to keep moving forward. Now, cons. There are cons to suspension lifts. There's pretty much cons to anything that you there's pretty much cons to anything in the 4x4 world. Some people may disagree with that statement, but I guess it kind of depends on what you're building. If you're building an everyday, go to the grocery store and then trail run kind of a thing, then there's going to be cons. But if you're just building a 4x4 machine that you're going to trailer everywhere, there'd probably be less cons. But getting to the cons list, like we talked about with body lifts, you will have altered the center of gravity. Yep. But yeah, sadly, when you lift something higher, even if it's a body lift or suspension lift, you're going to alter the center of gravity, which allows your vehicle to have a higher chance of body roll and possible loose steering in handling or cornering or side hilling. It could potentially happen. In fact, it does. You can look up anything on YouTube about Jeeps rolling over. They're way too tall and they don't have wide enough stance. We'll get into that in another podcast. They don't have a wide enough stance to balance out the center of gravity. The next thing is stress on your steering components. When you lift something up and it just puts stress on joints and ball joints and tie rod ends, and it just wreaks havoc on them, especially when you start putting bigger tires on it. Engineers designed vehicles to be a certain height, to travel a certain speed, to handle a certain way, and we are taking all that engineering knowledge and throwing it out the window and basically engineering our own brand new vehicle. But if you don't do it correctly, it could turn catastrophic. So when you're putting lifts in, make sure, like a suspension lift, make sure that you are really thinking through the process of angles, right? If you lift something too high, you might have to change your pinion. Wow, if you lift something too high, you may have to change your pinion angle, so your U-joints don't bind in your front or rear drive lines. Another thing is you might have to do a cut and turn, which we'll talk about that part 2, cut and turn, so that everything's lined up, and there's a whole lot of math involved to making sure that your vehicle is safe, and then it's not going to wear out parts faster than normal. Another con of a suspension lift is cost and complexity of install. It's not like a body lift where you could probably get it done in a couple hours. Because of the thinking process, because of the removing of the springs, the shackles, and depending on what kind of lift you're going to put in, we'll get to that, like I said, in the next podcast. But there's a lot of time behind suspension lifts and money. Plus, you're going to need the proper tools to install suspension lifts. You're going to need the proper time, like I said before, to install suspension lifts. And you may have to upgrade your parts, specifically your steering components. When I lifted my 74 International Scout, I had to put a Z drag link in it, and they look like a Z, so it didn't bump steer every time I hit a bump. So you may have to upgrade parts and add that into your cost of putting your suspension lift in. The last part of the cost and complexity is you may have to change your pinion angle. This is going back to the time and thinking and math and all sorts of this good and glorious lifting project that you're gonna have going. But the pinion angle is important. If you have a bad pinion angle, your vehicle, like I said, may bind in your front or rear drive shaft. It also may alter your handling, steering capabilities. The Scout that I have, I don't have my pinion angle correct, and the thing drives pretty much all over the road. That's also a Scout thing. They're very notorious for that, unless you do a spring over, but I just don't have the time or money to do that because those are very expensive and take a lot of time. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for To Lift or Not to Lift, part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, it'll be coming shortly. And if you'd like to watch this podcast, you can find it at 4x4 USA on youtube.com. Now don't forget to wheel on over to the like, share, and subscribe button so I can catch you here on the next one. And like always, God bless.